In one of my other videos, I answered the question, what is land use planning? And in that video, one of the things I point out is if you're a person that works at a government agency, county, a city, or state agency, and you tell people what they can and can't do with their land, you are not a land use planner, you are a land use regulator. So we use that term land use planning a little too loosely, I think, especially here in California. Most of the people that think they're land use planners are actually land use regulators, and we should make that clear. Usually people in that situation are not there to help you do stuff with your land. They're there to keep you from doing stuff with your land. That's just kind of a general rule. And so in that video, I talked a little bit about, well, then who actually does land use planning, the real thing? Well, it's typically people, what I call private land planners, okay? So a private land planner is not somebody that works for a government agency. They are in what we call private practice. They own a business, they're a consultant, and they help people with land use planning. So here's my definition of what land use planning really is. Okay, land use planning is a professional service provided by a private land planner to help a client prepare for changes in use to land, to a particular piece of property. So in California, land surveyors are actually licensed to do private land planning. So we're the only professional in California licensed to provide that service. I consider myself to be not only a licensed land surveyor, but also a private land planner. You will hear me say that sometimes in some of these videos. So a private land planner is somebody that helps a client plan for changes in use to their land. Now, most frequently, that is a situation where we're helping a client, what we call intensify the use of their land. So they're taking farmland or maybe some vacant land, some open space land, and they're going to build something on it, or they're going to develop it in some way. That's the typical case, but that is not always the case, which is why I use that phrase, prepare for changes in use to land. That's what we're helping our clients do, because I, on more than one occasion in my career, have actually helped clients do the opposite. I've helped clients prepare to put land into conservation, environmental conservation. And I mean, more than one time that we've done that. So sometimes we help farmers figure out if and how and when and where they want to put land into a farmland conservation easement. We've worked with land conservation trusts in the past to figure out how to take land that's for sale to be developed and to either put conservation easements on that land, or we're trying to help the land trust just buy that land outright and put it into their land holdings for conservation. And there's all kinds of things that are involved in that. So it's not just change in use for what we call development. It could be a number of different things that we help our clients with, depending on who they are. Okay, so that's what land use planning is. It's something that's done by people in private practice. They're helping a client that owns some land or that's going to purchase some land, figure out what can they do with that property, right? We're planning for some changes in land use. Okay, now this does include a very important part of being a private land planner is understanding land use regulation, especially in a place like California where we heavily regulate land use, right? So as a private land planner, one of the things you need to know is how land use is regulated, okay? So we have that in common with people that work in the public sector as land use regulators, right? Because we need to know the land use regulations. Okay, but that's not the main part of being a private land planner. It's an important part, but it's not the main part. So more is included in being a private land planner. What kind of things? So I wrote down 4 things here that I want to tell you. 4 things. These are 4 things that a private land planner will help you with. This is not typically things the person that works down at your city or county's local planning department is going to help you with. So number 1, we can help you analyze potential uses for your property, right? We can talk about what the cost is going to be to change the use, what the timing is going to be like to get all the regulatory approvals you need, and what the value might be of your property after you change the use. That could be something really simple, just a zoning change, right? We're going to change your zoning from maybe Ag 40 to Ag 20. So 40 acre minimums parcel size to 20 acre minimum parcel size. What do you have to do to make that change? How long is it going to take? What's your likelihood of success? How's that going to change the value of the property, right? Okay, so that's one thing we do. We analyze potential land uses. Okay, the other thing we do, number 2, is we sometimes we will perform what I call conceptual design. So we're putting together some sketches, maybe some exhibits. We're playing around with some road layouts and some lot layouts. Maybe we're fiddling around a little bit with where you might be able to put some buildings, some building footprints. We're looking at the terrain and the regulatory requirements to see what you can do, right? Conceptual design. Okay. The third thing is we help design team increase the value for a particular project, land development project. So when I say design team, I mean usually you got an architect and a civil engineer, maybe you have a geotechnical engineer. Okay, and they're going to implement some vision for a piece of property. They're going to develop some piece of property. So one of the things a private land planner does is we come along and say, hey, if you configure the lots this way, if you put the lots around the park instead of shoving the park down in the corner, or if you make sure there's some, there's room for some retail in this neighborhood of 2,000 homes that you're going to put in, that will increase the appeal of the neighborhood, the value of the homes. If you, depending on what you do with the easements, there's all kinds of things we can do to help a design team increase the value of a particular piece of property, a particular development project. That's not necessarily things that civil engineers and architects are good at. Architects are primarily focused on the buildings, and they don't typically think, it's not their job primarily to think about overall land use and the way you, for example, lay out lots and streets and how that might impact the value. Now, good architects will do that, but a lot of architects are only worried about what's inside of the building. And then, civil engineers, my brethren, a lot of times they just lack imagination. They're going to build the road, the same road they've built for 20 years is the road they want to build on your project. And they're not thinking about, well, hey, if we add a bike path, or if we narrow the road, or, if we avoid cul-de-sacs, what might that do to the value of the real estate? So that's another thing we do. We bring that perspective to the design team. And then finally, the fourth thing that a private land planner does is they work to just guide the client through the whole land development process. So in many cases, again, those other professionals, the geotechnical engineer, the civil engineer, the architect, the contractor, they're only interested in their part of the project. The architect wants to design the buildings, the civil engineer wants to design the road and the grading and the drainage. The geotechnical engineer only wants to worry about the soils. The structural engineer only wants to worry about the bridges and the retaining walls. So a lot of times we'll find clients, they just struggle to have somebody that's just going to take them through this whole process, that understands the process from beginning to end, that has experience working with those other professionals, and just can take them from conceptual, to just finding a potential piece of property that would be a good investment, to conceptual design, to actual design, to construction, all the way to, occupancy permit, sale. Right, and so that's another thing that private land planners do, is they just guide the owner through that whole process. That's something that we're able to do here at Redefined Horizons for our clients. So, just to review, what is a private land planner? A private land planner is somebody in private practice that offers as a professional service the help that a client needs to change use in land, right? And typically that involves some kind of development. So you got a vacant piece of property and you want to put homes on it, or you want to put a shopping center on it, but not always. It could be putting land into conservation, or taking 3 ranches and making them into 1 ranch, or taking a ranch and turning it into an almond orchard. It's just change in use, right? And you need a private land planner to do that. Now, I will offer one tip here at the end of the video. A lot of times what people do, especially if they're not experienced developers or real estate investors, is they'll buy a piece of property, or they'll be thinking about buying a piece of property, and they'll run down to the local planning department at the city or county, and they'll say, hey, what can I do with this property? And they'll get a checklist, they'll get some information. Do not rely on those folks for critical information about real estate investment decisions, right? You got to remember a couple things. Number one, they don't work for you, right? They work for the local government agency, and oftentimes they have an incentive. Their job is to make sure that you're not doing things the local government doesn't think you should be doing with your property. And especially in California, we often find situations in which the local government is overreaching. So they're placing more restrictions on your land than they're legally allowed to, or they're interpreting the regulations in their favor. And I'm not saying any of that is malicious or intentional necessarily, but I will just, from personal experience, I can tell you that Number one, if you're in smaller jurisdictions, a lot of the people at your local planning department do not have a lot of education or experience in planning. They got the job because they know somebody. And number two, a lot of people that do, if you go to school for 4 years or 6 years to be a planner, most of those people are typically not what I would call pro-development. They're very much concerned about the environment and about restricting development. Again, I'm painting in broad brushes here. There could be exceptions to that rule, but here's the whole point. You can't rely on those people to look out for your interests if you're a landowner. That's not their job, and that may not be what their incentives are encouraging them to do, and it may not be what their inherent biases are encouraging them to do. So if you really want to know what you can do with your property, you need to work with a good land attorney, maybe a good real estate broker, and for sure a good private land planner, which in most cases in California is going to be, or Nevada is going to be, a licensed land surveyor. So there you go. Now you know what a private land planner is.